and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we have what's going to be the start of a number of episodes that we're going to do that I'm really excited about. So, if you know anything about me, if you've been watching the show, or if you know me from outside of the show, you know that I am a big proponent of lessons learned, right? That our experiences, other people's experiences that we're paying attention to, that we learn our lessons from the experiences we have. And then it dawned on me that, well, it didn't actually dawn on me because someone actually wrote a book, right? This was written in the 80s. Robert Fulghum, I believe is how you pronounce his name. All the things I need to know I learned in kindergarten. Sort of that concept that so many lessons that we have for life are contained in children's stories, fables, etc. Right? So you think about the stories that you read as children, and a lot of time we just took the entertainment value. If we were lucky, we had parents that read them and sort of acted them out. I tried to do that. I wasn't really good at it, but I tried to do that with my own child. But there are lessons in them. And so we're going to be bringing a number of stories and the lessons that are contained in them, particularly things that you can pull from the stories and the fables that apply to leadership. And we are starting today with the story, The Emperor's New Clothes. And so the way we're going to do this is that Robert and I will read the stories, reread the stories if we've read them before, right? Remember them from childhood. Read them for the first time if we've not read them before. And then we will discuss them cold here. So we will not have compared notes about what we took from the stories. And we'll see if we end up with lots of lessons or if we end up with sort of the same lessons that come from them. So I think it'll be interesting to do it that way. And we invite you to join us to share the lessons that you've taken from the very same story. So we'll let you know what the stories are ahead of time. I am, in addition, I'm not promising every single story, but I'm going to do my best to drop a LinkedIn article with some insights that I have about the stories and the lessons within them as well. So we're starting with The Emperor's New Clothes, and I'm not going to talk about this in the context of current day events totally, but there are some similarities, I think, and some leadership that we are seeing currently, or lack of leadership that we are seeing currently, and the story of the emperor. So, with that, Robert, some opening thoughts.
I'm really excited about this because it's scarier. It's a lot less scary than current events, right? So it's a safe place. But this is something we talked about years ago. This is not a new thing. You and I talked about doing this a long time ago. And I cannot tell you the number of times when I'm talking to somebody or consulting with an organization, and a leader will say something, or someone will tell me a story about a leader, and I'll say, oh, that's the Emperor's New Clothes, or that's this. And this is not something that was done in my head, a conscious thing. It's because it just really draws that parallel from this story that I heard way back when, many centuries ago, when I was a child. So I think it's a real natural kind of transition and way to do this.
So awesome. So how about um we start with, you know what, it would have made sense if I had sort of written down a summary of the story. I'm going to remember to do that in the future,
Oh,
because there are going to be people who haven't read or haven't read the story recently. And so but in my notes, I did not. I think I'm going to double check. I don't think I put a really good summary of the story. So, do you have one? Otherwise, I'll do a super sketchy outline.
well, I think what happens in the story, if I recall, is that the king, some new tailors come to town. These are people that were not necessarily subjects of this king. They came from outside of the realm kind of, and they said they had this. They could make this king a new wardrobe with this magical cloth that would make him, I don't know, they would give him some kind of attributes. I don't know what those attributes are. And so they work on this thing. They went through, they pantomimed working on this, sewing this beautiful outfit for this king. And as they're doing it, they're talking about their artistry, how good it looks. And say, in doing that, the king starts agreeing with them because they're so enthusiastic about what they're doing. And so the king, they go through the whole artifice of dressing this king up, and then the king goes and he goes out in public with this, and everyone around him, his whole royal court is going, "Oh my goodness, you look amazing! You've never looked more radiant and majestic." And he's parading around the streets because he wants everyone to see this beautiful new wardrobe with these magical properties. And as he's walking to the street, this kid, nearly everybody in the kingdom is going, "Oh, he's so magnificent. He looks so great." And then this one kid goes, "He's naked." And then everyone was like, "Well, yeah, we can see that he's naked." But the king was humiliated. He got humiliated because he realized that he was indeed naked. So that's just my Reader's Digest version of that.
That is a good summary. I actually found my notes, and that's a very good summary, right? So the tailors, swindlers, I will call them, claimed that the suit was that the weave that they used for the suit was so fine it was invisible to anyone who was unfit, right, for their role, or that they were so hopelessly stupid. So at that point, this emperor has to pretend that he sees
Yeah.
what they're talking about because he doesn't want to seem unworthy,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and then everyone else, again, not wanting to feel like they're unworthy, they do the same thing. So you've got this, and I think this sets up sort of, at least for me, some of the lessons in this is that we pretend like everything is fine because we don't want other people to think poorly of us, right? And so, as you said, he parades out through the city in his new clothes, and because no one wants to be the one to say, "Oh, he's not wearing anything," and then it's a child or it's Whitney, right? That's the way it's turned out in my life. That I'm the one who's like, "Excuse me," and then sort of the facade falls. So, why don't we start with, how would you like to do this? You want to do your 3 lessons and see if I have the same, or you want to go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1?
Let's
Alternate.
let's alternate.
Okay.
That's how we usually do it, right?
Okay. Go for it.
Well, I had originally this is what's really funny about this, and this is why these stories are almost magical, because as I was telling the summary, something jumped into my head that I didn't originally write down. So I had 3 lessons. Now I have 4.
Okay.
The first one, and because not everyone, but most of us typically look at how foolish the king was. That we also look at how foolish his court was, right? And we look at, how transparent and, innocent the child was. But let's start with the thing that no one usually talks about is the integrity of the tailors. So integrity. So you and I are consultants. We have to have integrity. When we come into an organization, we shouldn't be bartering in nonsense by saying, well, this technique that we're using is so good that if you don't understand how powerful it is, then you don't deserve to be CEO or COO, right? Which is basically what they did to they gaslit him right from the beginning. So he was thinking, well, of course I see how, I can see it. I'm regal. Of course I see that. So that's the first thing that jumped into my head when I was talking. I was like, wow, no one usually talks about the swindlers. So I want to start there. It's like you have to have integrity when you have something or you're creating something. You need to move in whatever circle you're moving in with integrity, because
I love that. I love that.
Especially today, when everything is so connected. And you and I were just having a conversation before we got on the show. We won't revisit that because you won't be able to stop laughing. But we're so connected now. You make a comment on social media, that's there. People, unless you delete it, people can pull that up. People take screenshots of that stuff. They can use that against you and your company. So you need to move with integrity. So I'll just leave it right there for right now.
No, I love that. And I will admit I hadn't thought of it from that perspective either. And I love that you tied it to the work that we do and the importance of how we move, and the importance of moving with integrity and authenticity, so that and not gaslighting, right? Of course, when the story was written and when I read it for the first time as a child, or hundreds of times as a child, gaslighting wasn't right. We didn't use that terminology, but that's exactly what they did, right? That they worked to make the emperor and his court feel a particular way about something that was not the truth.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought that up. And since you have 4, I only have 3. So I'm going to go, and then that means you'll get to wrap up with the last one.
Okay.
So I'm going to tie this also to our framework. Right. In some respects, I'm going to tie this back to our framework. And so self-awareness, which is the S in simple, our framework is a simple leadership method. And the S is for self-awareness. And of course, leadership begins with self-awareness. Right. And so that the leader, right, after being gaslit, did not stand in his principles, right? To say, you guys are full of it. There is no there, right? So they did their part, but he steps in, he gets sucked into that, and he won't let his ego, right? So his ego blocks him from, or prevents him from standing in what he knows to be the truth. And we see that often in not only at the top, but throughout organizations, right? Particularly, I think, in sort of the middle management levels of the organization. So you've got people at the bottom who we could see sort of akin to the child in the story, who are willing to call out what is or what isn't, and the people above them, their managers, sort of, again, out of fear, out of not wanting to anger the CEO or whoever is above them, just not saying anything. And so this emperor or leaders, right, who let their egos get in the way that prevent them from seeing the truth, standing on what they know to be true, and at the same time not trusting, right? Not trusting that if they are open to feedback and hearing things, people aren't going to say anything. And I think that becomes part of the challenge in the story is, okay, you could have the emperor sort of saying, "Oh, if I don't see this garment, there's something wrong with me," but that the people around him, right, don't feel like they can say anything as well. So this creation that, and we talk about this frequently on the show about how we create environments where feedback is not allowed, right? That people fear being the one to speak up, and it creates a problem. And so leadership, it begins with self-awareness. We have to be aware of who we are and how we show up. I think that integrity piece, right? It applies to the tailors, the swindlers. It applies to the emperor as well, because he's not in his integrity and saying, "No, I don't see that," and taking the risk that whatever they're saying, however they're gaslighting him, right? That's not the case, and being okay with it. It's one thing that not to see it. He didn't even ask to feel it. Just
Right.
can I feel this garment? Right. But okay.
It's so fine. It's so fine that it lets all the wind in. Oh my goodness. But yeah, yeah, it's crazy. I want to piggyback off of what you said, because my second, first of all, let me ask, were you done with your point before
Yes.
I jump in? Because I don't want to. So the second one is the importance of transparent communication. And this is really touching on what you said. Leaders need to foster an environment where people feel free to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. People in the story were so afraid of retribution; they were so afraid of that, and the court was so full of false agreement that people went along with this fallacy. And often, and I want to push this a little bit, because imagine the retribution that they finally, came their way, the court, after the king said, "You let me go outside naked." And we sometimes don't think about that. Sometimes it's better to take the risk and say, "Look, I know that everybody's saying this, but here's some things that you may want to consider before you, use the strategy, before you buy this product, before you introduce this to the organization, before you start your retrenchment strategy, laying off people that you don't think are essential." These are some things that you may need to consider, or you should probably consider. But we often forget that the people that go ahead and amplify the already bad idea of a leader who may or may not be insecure, they often get retribution, right? And we sometimes forget about that.
That's such a good point. It's sort of, do you want to take your medicine now or later? At least the now could be internal. It's a smaller group, as opposed to letting this become public, and then not only having to deal with that retribution. You let me, right? You didn't tell me. You didn't reiterate. You didn't. And I've worked for someone like that, right? Where even if you said something because that person only wanted to hear what they wanted to hear,
Yeah.
that it became about you not trying hard enough to make the case.
Right.
And so take the medicine now or take the medicine later, right?
Yeah.
So it's something definitely to keep in mind. Um, my next one sort of builds on that, and it is this concept that silence isn't neutral, right? And that culture ultimately is a reflection of the leader. So it builds on this concept of what fear and being in environments where people don't feel psychologically safe, right? So then no one speaks up, and it becomes it is just a reflection of what the leader has created, or leaders in some cases have created. And so think about what is your purpose. What is it that you are trying to achieve in your role in this story? What is it that the emperor was trying to achieve, right? If we ask that question, he's trying to achieve or portray to his subjects that he is high and mighty and above it all. And so look at me. I'm here, and the rest of you, if you don't see what I see, then you're peasants. You're nothing. Because that was the message that was given to him, and then he spreads that message out. So it becomes ultimately a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so being clear about what it is your purpose is, what it is you're trying to achieve, because you want to be clear that what you're trying to how you're going about trying to achieve what you're doing is in fact what it is that you're trying to achieve, right? That sort of that vision that you have and the purpose behind that is really in alignment. And often that's not the case. And so I was thinking, I wrote go along to get along. I
Mhm.
worked for an organization, and the board did this a lot. And I think I've shared some of the various stories where some proposal, doesn't matter what, but something would be presented to the board to make a decision on from the CEO of that organization. And then the board would not ask questions, not really challenge the proposal. It's put out there, it's not explained well, but
Mm.
no one asked any questions, right? No
Mhm.
one asked any questions. Then they vote, and then inevitably, there was always one who would sort of be the one to sort of stand up. But because of who that person was, right? Sometimes there was no respect, or people oh, they're just difficult.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so they go along to get along, and then afterwards start asking questions.
Yeah.
And when you've created an environment where silence is the order of the day, you have to be clear and understand that silence isn't neutral, and it is a decision in and of itself, and therefore there are consequences that go along with that.
I agree. I think what you're saying really piggybacks off of or is connected to my next lesson with this, and it's beware groupthink, because that's what this really. I think the story tells a couple of things. Underneath it is like we're all the same. No one could see, no one can see it. But on the bigger scale, it's what's really out in front is this whole group thing, where they leaders need to encourage diverse perspectives and critical thinking so that they can get real information about what they're proposing or what the direction that they want to take the organization. Nobody in that royal court was brave enough. And groupthink is when you just want to, like you said, go along to get along. You don't want to be the one that goes, hey, so everyone agrees. And we know from countless stories that groupthink in many cases can lead to disaster. In this particular story, it's just the king being humiliated in public, but I wonder who was beheaded after the fact, because you mean you didn't tell me? You knew that I was naked and you didn't say anything? But that's the danger of groupthink as well. When everyone is talking, and going in the same direction, because they're like, you know what? I don't want to be the one. I don't want to go against what the engineers are saying, or the engineers are going, I don't want to go against what R&D is saying, and things like that. And those things can cause real trouble. And I'm using those terms, engineering and R&D, because I'm thinking of the Challenger. That's a very famous case of groupthink. People were like, well, after the fact, we're like, well, this did come into my head that there could be problems with the O-rings, or problems because of the weather and other things, but I didn't want to rock the boat. Well, the boat exploded. That's a real consequence of groupthink. And it's what really needs to happen is you have to create that environment, and like you said, psychological safety, where people can say, look, there's some things we really need to consider. I know everyone else is saying this, but I want to play devil's advocate, for lack of a better term, and put this out there. And the leader has to have a strong enough ego to say, you know what, let's consider that. And it's really interesting, because I was having a conversation with somebody today, and it was like, sometimes, and not in all organizations, there's some fantastic CEOs out there and some really terrific leaders out there. But in some organizations, the higher up some people get, the more fragile that shell gets. And they do everything they can to protect it at all costs. So I think that's a really big lesson from this story.
Ooh, I like that. And that's something I'm going to follow up on in a little bit. My third one is that the truth comes from the edges. And I think about this again in the context that I have been in, personally, being sort of that one. It comes from, I think, just the nature of who I am as a rebel, and reinforced through my training as a lawyer. And we talked about this, I believe, in that last episode, right? As a lawyer, it has been, I was trained to ask questions, to think of things in a different way, and regardless of what people think of lawyers, in the work that some lawyers do, I see my training in this respect is as to make sure that the direction that one is moving in, and I advise organizations in my role as a lawyer, as I do as a consultant outside of the law, not outside of the law, but not as a lawyer. Never advising anyone to do anything outside the law. But in my capacity as a lawyer, right, asking questions is about risk mitigation, risk management. And so it's always about asking the questions and looking at things from hopefully a 360 perspective as quickly as possible, right? So that I can provide the information that decision makers need to make in order to make an informed decision. And so being that one, it comes naturally to me, right? One, as a rebel, but two, as someone who's trained to do that. And then now as a consultant through my training, other trainings beyond the law, again, to help organizations look at things in all the perspectives as quickly as possible so that informed decisions can be made. And so if whoever is in charge is not open to having that unfiltered feedback, right? If they're not encouraging that, whether it's from legal counsel, their consultants, the staff, etc., it creates a problem. And so I think the leadership lesson here is for the gallery, and to be okay being that fresh perspective. Be okay with being, regardless of whether or not the environment is set up and psychological safety is provided, that someone has to be that one, respectfully, of course, right? And not be someone who's always seen as the downer, the one who's trying to be recalcitrant and all of that, which lawyers tend to get that label. But be okay. Someone has to be okay with being that person, that the child in the story, the one with the fresh perspective, the one with the honest feedback, and saying, I'm willing to call it the way I see it, and hopefully others will hear enough of it that it sparks enough of an interest, some curiosity, that other people will ask questions so that we can actually have the conversation.
You remind me so much of something I used to tell my mentees when I had the leadership development program. And I would tell them, there are going to be times when you may feel the need to buck the system. You may feel the need to say something because you're seeing something that other people aren't seeing. And I said, you want to be careful. I said, the way I taught them was, you have 3 magic coins throughout your tenure in this organization. Those magic coins allow you to speak your mind, to stand up for things you really believe in, to do those things, to go against the grain. I said, you have 3 magic coins. For your entire tenure in this organization, spend them wisely. Yeah. And people sometimes, when we see things, and I've fallen prey to this too, which is why I came up with the 3 magic coins thing, because I was usually the person going, well, have you thought about this? Or, this, I was that person in some cases. And so I pared back and I said, well, I need to remind myself, and it worked for me, that if I only have 3 times in my career, and it may be different for other organizations, but for me, it was 3 times that I really need to stand up for something, that I really need to buck the system, that I really need to make my voice heard. If I only had 3 times in my career, my tenure in this organization, to do that, it really helped temper and help me adjudicate, using those lawyerly words, even though I'm not a lawyer, adjudicate when I should speak up, when I should keep my mouth shut, when I should fight for something. So I wanted to say that. So that's what you reminded me of when you were talking about that.
No, that's greatly appreciated. And I probably could have used that wise counsel some in my career. But I think the way I see that and take that is, and then I want to apply it to the story, because let's say that the reason that there is no psychological safety is because everyone's used up their 3 coins.
Could be.
Right? And so now you get to this place where no one's saying anything because of that. So I think you hear what Robert is saying, and I think there's truth in that, but you have to temper that, right? And not think, well, I used up my 3 coins. It's not a literal 3 coins. It
Right.
could be a literal 3 coins, but it's a metaphor,
Mhm.
right? And it becomes about what can you say something and not die on the sword for it? Right
Mhm.
there are those times when you need to just go to the mat for something and say, I'm really, this is where I'm coming from and I'm not moving off of this. And then there are other times where you can lay something out, and then, if people push back, it's like, okay, I said what I needed to say, because what you don't want is to have the emperor come back and say, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" And you're like, "Because I told you the last 3 times and you bit off my head. So I'm not saying anything anymore." And so we have to, but it's a balance. All of this is a balancing act,
Sure.
right? Being a leader, working for leaders, and this none of this is necessarily easy, and it's not cut and dry, and it's not all or nothing, and it's not black or white. It's very nuanced. But what you don't want is to, as the person that sets the tone and creates the environment, is that you create an environment where people will not speak up,
Yeah.
one. And from the other side, to not be so afraid that you won't be willing to put a little something at risk when necessary. I just want to call, not getting into politics, but reading a couple of different stories about some of the law firms that have gotten wrapped up in the executive orders. And to the degree I'm going to talk about politics, that's it, laying out the sort of
Yeah.
the context of this. But listen to one particular lawyer from one of the firms that made a deal, and she left her job,
Mhm.
right? It's high profile law firm, like big, what they call big law, right? These people make tons of money. You come out of law school making like $250,000, right? Working at these law firms, and depending on your billable hours and whether how you move up, etc., they make extreme amounts of money. And so to walk away from your job, right? Most of us wouldn't walk away from a job that made a fraction of what, I don't know exactly what she makes, but most of us would not walk away from a job making a fraction of that on our principles. And she was like, I can't work for a law firm that would go down this path, whatever that path is for her,
Mhm.
right? And so it is akin to this story that we're talking about, when you have to be willing to look at, what are you willing to put at risk in order to tell the truth? And the beauty of children is they don't, right? The beauty and the fallacy of children is that they don't. One, until you reach a certain age, you really don't have the capacity. So children just tend to say what they see, right? They just speak the truth
Mhm.
because they don't understand yet consequences. And so as adults, we shy away from that because we're so busy protecting things.
Yeah.
But again, it's a balancing act. You can't act like a child. I'm not at all suggesting that you go into a board meeting or meeting, executive team meeting, and just spew, all the truth without a filter. You have to, you need to know your audience. You need to know how to say what you need to say in a way that it will be heard. But there has to be a willingness to put a little something at risk, while holding on or doing the calculus for your 3 magic coins.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the last, and you just touched on, it's funny how you say something And then at the very end, you'll touch on what I'm about to speak on next. And it's really the last one is the value of listening to all voices.
Mm.
So the truth came from someone who had, we'll just say the least status in the kingdom. It was a child, no status. And I think a lot of times when there are plenty of situations when I'm looking at an ad, a TV ad, that's just not very good. And I go, I wonder who was in the room, right? Because if you get the right voices in the room, and it's usually the people that are lower in the company hierarchy, they're going to give you a fresh perspective most of the time, or quite often, and you're going to be able to see things. They're going to bring things to light that you didn't even think of.
Yeah,
because they have a completely different perspective. They have a completely different take on the organization. They have a completely different take on the product or service so those voices are so important. And in the story, it was that little child that was like, hey, look, everybody. But I can imagine the moment before that kid was looking around going, are these people just stupid? Right? Like, let me just help them out here. He's naked, right? But that's the importance. And this really comes to light when you think about, I mentioned products or services. If you have a new product that you're about to put in the market, make sure that you get a wide, that focus group has a wide swath of people there. So you can take a look at it from all kinds of angles, not just the angle that you belong to, right? People that make this amount of money, or, even if you don't think the people can, the people that are lower socioeconomically, maybe they can't buy that product as it is now, but maybe they can add some light to it. If you did this and this and this, you could probably lower the price, right? Maybe they're not going to use that language, lower the price and sell it to other people. But sometimes we get so caught up in our idea that this material is so fine that only people of a certain level can actually see it, that we don't realize that, well, if we made it from real material, everybody can enjoy it. So I think that's a really important lesson there as well.
It's funny you say that. It was a particular staff meeting popped into my head, and someone shared something. The emperor walked in naked, and everybody sort of looked at each other, right, as this person was talking, and they're like, am I the only one? Am I the only one that's hearing this, that's seeing this? And everybody pretty much put their hands underneath their legs and just sat there, right? And so it's
well, Whitnie, sometimes it's how the leaders interact with their followers. And sometimes their behavior contradicts what they actually want. And I tell this story all the time about being in, getting called to this meeting that was this impromptu meeting. And the person facilitating this meeting was, this is one of my favorite stories that I know I'm repeating myself. It's like, we're going to brainstorm this problem that we have. And you have me there. I'm a professional facilitator. I've done hundreds of brainstorming sessions. I facilitated them. They didn't use me. He wanted to do it himself, which is fine. I didn't have a problem with that. But what I did have a problem with is every time someone, we know how brainstorming went. We would throw out ideas. This person would say, that won't work here. That happened like 3 or 4 times. And everyone, like you said, sat on their hands. And whenever the facilitator would ask a question, no one would say anything. We all would look at each other. And then it was really funny because the person sitting next to me said, I should tell him that we're quiet because he keeps shooting us down. But she goes, and she went, but that won't work here.
And it's interesting because exactly what you said is that thing that you get these side conversations where
Mm-hmm.
people are talking through the conversation that really needs to be had.
Yeah.
And people are like, what's the point? What's the point, right? Again, going back to your 3 magic coins. If you get to a place where you've used up your coins and now you're like, I don't have the protection of my magic coins and I'm stepping out on a limb here. Is it worth the risk reward? Is it worth it?
Right.
And people are often doing the calculus and going, no, it's not. So, whatever happens, happens. And then you have to deal with the blowback of why didn't someone tell me I was naked, or that, this was not a great decision, that this product was flawed, that the O-ring, all the things, right? It doesn't do anyone any good to talk about what you could have said after the disaster happens, right?
Yeah.
That you thought about that ahead of time, but you didn't say anything. It doesn't do any good.
Helps no one. And I think that the real tragedy in this situation was that particular person that was running that meeting, whenever you told them something that didn't like, they would literally shut down and look away from you. They were so fragile that they couldn't handle, even if you approached it in the most humane. I just want to give you some feedback about as to why we weren't participating. That person couldn't handle it. It was a little scary because this was a grown man. I was like, you should be able. I'm sure you're not getting. This is not the first time you've encountered any form of constructive feedback. But even if it was couched in the softest way, their default way of handling it was just to ignore it. And if they asked, and then you would be like, well, maybe they didn't hear me. And then you would ask it again, and this person would just look at you in the face and then turn away as to say, I don't want to talk about it. And so you would just leave the room. So at that particular point, after we had all kind of experienced that with this person, we were like, okay, well, we know we can't tell them anything. So maybe they'll learn the lesson if we just don't say anything here. Maybe they'll come to the realization on their own and be like, well, maybe I could have done something better and facilitated this brainstorming session in a more effective way. So that's what, and it was one of those weird things where we kind of all had some groupthink there, but it was because we were trying to have a conversation that was productive, and every time someone said something, it just got shut down. It was very clear this person had a specific answer that they wanted us to say. Then just say it. I want to do this, right? Here's what we're going to do. It's not up for debate. Let's do this. You can't go into brainstorming looking for a specific answer.
And that's one of those places where integrity and intellectual honesty is so important, right? If that's the direction that you want to go, you're in charge. You can do that.
Do it.
Let's not pretend and waste time doing something else. And so it's very similar here. So why don't you summarize your 4 points? I will then wrap up and close with my 3 points. And they dovetailed, right? We had a lot of sort of flowing in and out. This was not like 7 discrete things. They are very much interconnected. But let's summarize and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah. So the first one is integrity. Have integrity with what you're about to put forward in your organization, whether it's a product, service, an idea. Have integrity. The importance of transparent communication. Create an environment where people can speak their mind, no matter how uncomfortable it may make. the others in the room and leadership and the leadership that's there. Be very wary, beware of groupthink, understand what it is, and realize when it's happening, and do what you can to break people out of it, because it can cause some really dire consequences in your organization. And the last one is the value of listening to all voices, because you need multiple perspectives so that you can see what can happen, what could go wrong, what can go right, and how your idea, product, or service can be valuable to your organization, your community, and to people.
Love that. My three, that leadership begins with self-awareness. You have to be clear about who you are, and you cannot let your ego get in the way of you hearing what others in your, particularly those on your team, have to say, right? Which leads into creating an environment where fear is not a factor, and where you've created psychological safety for people so that people will speak up. And just know that the culture that you have is a reflection of your leadership. And then that the truth comes from the edges. It doesn't always come from the place that we necessarily value, right? And we have a society that doesn't particularly value children and whatever insight they have. There are some valid reasons for that in some respect, but you've got to think about who provides that fresh perspective and make it possible for you to hear, right? You've got to encourage feedback and let it be unfiltered, and not have your ego wrapped in it in such a way that you can't hear what people have to say. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us for our discussion about the Emperor's new clothes. The Emperor's new clothes.
Someone said nude clothes.
The Emperor's new clothes. And know that we are going to be bringing this as a regular feature. We're going to be talking about different children's stories, fables, and bringing out the lessons in them, leadership life lessons that are to be found in them. If you've got a favorite story that you would like for us to explore, share it with us. Just like we ask you if you've got a topic that you would like for us to cover, let us know. We're always looking for interesting topics that are important to you. So feel free to share. If you're interested in being a guest on the program, we've got a couple of guests lined up for the next couple of months. If you're interested in being a guest, you can also reach out to us, and we would love to have you on the show. So let's have a conversation about what you can contribute in terms of your leadership philosophy and how you are either helping leaders or growing yourself as a leader. And Robert, if someone is interested in getting in touch with you and developing their leadership prowess, not being an emperor, right? At least not a naked emperor, how would they go about doing that?
They can reach out to me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com. That is my email, or they can just go to my website, Robert Hilliard Coaching, and find that contact form, fill it out, let me know the things that you're trying to do, what goals you have, what challenges you're encountering, and we can get together and have a discovery call to see if we're a good match for each other.
Awesome. And if you would like to reach out to me at my website, shiftingintooaction.now.site, you can complete the form there, contact form, and let's have that conversation to see if we are a good match for each other. So Until next time, if you are watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and share. If you are watching on the other platforms, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook, drop a note in the comments. Let us know what your takeaways are from the Emperor's new clothes. And again, don't be the emperor, right? Don't be the emperor.
Don't.
Be
Not a good
someone
one.
who hears feedback and stands in your own knowledge and truth about who you are as a leader, and don't let other people gaslight you. So until next time, take care.
Bye now.